Gentlemen, hello and welcome to our session this morning. We are looking at how restoration can actually be a game changer when it comes to climate adaptation. We know that restoration is needed. We know it works, but how on earth do we take it to the next level to make sure that it's resilient? There are so many projects that are being done on the ground by amazing environmentalists. People have had to adapt in order to survive in their own space. But how do we make it last? How do we make it resilient? What lessons can be learned from these actual working examples that can also then be taken globally? We all know about campaigns. This is a campaign. We are in 2 weeks of a crazy campaign. But how do we take it forward into lasting action? So today we are going to be hearing from some individuals who, one, are responsible for the messaging, for the engagement at the higher levels of decision makers. We're also going to be hearing from those on the ground about how they engage, what they think works, what's missing, what would help them. Essentially today, we want to contribute to this growing body of knowledge, and my goodness, is the database full. We need to contribute to the next stage about how these restoration efforts can actually support climate adaptation and resilience on a global level. So what's needed? What can we do about it? What's learned? And how do we integrate it to make it last? So we're going to be showcasing some examples today. We want to platform these case studies. We want to talk about the complexities. This is something I think many of us were aware of, but yesterday I heard it firsthand, and it was from the young business entrepreneurs that were just in this previous session. I asked them, they were all pitching for a prize to take their business to the next level. And I asked them, how easy or who should you engage when you want to get something done within the community? Is it easier to speak to a woman or to speak to a man when it comes to business negotiations? And one, they said, do you know what? We always thought it'd be easier to go to a woman, but within our community, we had to go to the man first because of the complexities. And secondly, they said it's not always easy to engage because there is so much doubt, there is so much mistrust because people have been let down. Communities have been let down. And I'm going to hopefully hear more of that today about how our guests got around that particular barrier. So that's what's going to happen. We've got presentations. We've got some welcome remarks from Joanne Lee, who is the program officer at the G20 Global Land Initiative. We're also going to be hearing, as I said, for the lady who is responsible for the communications, and then presentations from our guests. And then I'm going to open the floor to any questions, any queries. If you'd like to know how to do it, what challenges you felt, we will hopefully be hearing your particular queries. So first off, please welcome Joanne Lee.
Thank you so much, Luquessa. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joanne Lee. I'm a program officer for the G20 Global Land Initiative. I'm sure by now all of you know what the G20 Global Land Initiative is. It started in 2020 in this very city, Riyadh, by the G20 leaders with the global ambition to reduce 50% of land degradation by the year 2040. And we know land degradation and climate change are global challenges which require international responses and collaboration. And so that's where the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration provides a very unique and needed platform for collaboration with all types of organizations around the world. And so we're very happy to be joined by Anne Catherine from the UN Decade here. And she'll be able to tell you more about the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So among the different challenges under the UN Decade, the G20 Global Land Initiative leads the Land Restoration Challenge. And so through this land challenge, we aim to tackle 5 key areas in order to address climate change and land degradation, and to really build resilience among the different communities. The first way is through stronger laws and policies. We need an enabling environment. And we have the Global Change Makers Academy for parliamentarians every summer in Bonn. And we bring in these lawmakers from different countries to really provide them with the knowledge and the skills needed to build an enabling environment for land restoration. The second way is through increased investments for large-scale restoration projects as well as community-based projects. And we have several different activities for this as well. The first is we work with mining companies, and some of the representatives are here as well. We help them to have the knowledge and skills for restoring the land after the mining activities have ended. We also have our youth ecopreneurs, which was the previous program this morning, and they're actually going to be here behind the stage all day to talk with you about their different businesses. We also have the small grants program where we provide seed funding for a lot of this community-led resilience projects. And this year we've been awarding between $5,000 and $15,000 to different NGOs around the world. And we're actually going to have an event at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning in this very pavilion with our grant winners. So please do join us then. The third is capacity building. As I've briefly mentioned, we have different trainings all over the world for governments, NGOs, private sector. And so we have different trainings on biosalient agriculture, urban planning, gender issues, post-mining restoration, various topics related to restoration. And so you can apply through our website, g20land.org as well. The fourth area is building awareness and education for schools. And so we've developed a master's course on sustainable agriculture for professors to integrate into their curricula. And we have a QR code somewhere in the back where you can actually register for this. And we're currently developing one on urban planning as well. And our last way is through information sharing. So we've developed the Global Restoration Information Hub, and that provides different country profiles, different legislations from different countries, and it highlights good practices from around the world. So please do check out the Global Restoration Information Hub too. So please do join us for the Land Challenge. You can also join through the QR code back there and also through our website. And we hope to be able to collaborate with you in the future and hope that you can join us in our global efforts to restore land. And we're very happy to have some of our partners from the Land Challenge here with us today to give us different remarks about what they're doing in their countries for land restoration. So thank you so much.
Joanne Lee, thank you very much indeed. And if you want to grab Joanne later, please do. Joanne has experience in law and advocacy, particularly working with women. She was based at one point with the California Department of Justice, and it was coordinating advocacy and also outreach efforts. So do grab her if you want to find out more. Okay, next, let's find out about the messaging, how to engage communities and get the campaign on the road. Joining us now, please, is Anne-Catherine, who is the Communications Manager of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And it's Anne-Catherine Nuretha. Nearly? Why don't you come up and say it correctly? Just grab a microphone. Just that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, and forgiven for the last name. This is why I actually don't even go by Anne-Catherine, because that's a mouthful as well. So I'm more known as AK. I'm the communications manager for the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. By the way, I love your shoes. Are those leopards?
Because they are, but they've been chewed by my dog, so they're a little bit dog-eared.
Because bringing back the Arabian leopard is actually one of the restoration goals of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which is very ambitious, very inspirational, and it also shows us how by bringing back whole landscapes, we can also do something for nature and people. But first of all, good morning, everyone. It's still morning, right? Because I've been running around since 6 o'clock, so you lose track of time. Let's start with a little warm-up exercise for everyone here in the room and in the pavilion. Can you please stand up if you're actively working on implementing restoration on the ground? You're a restoration implementer. Wow. Wow. Give a round of applause to yourselves because you're actually doing the hard work here. I'm just standing here talking. Is there anyone working on policy for restoration? Any policy makers? Yes, please stand up, sir. Yay, thank you. Thank you for providing us with the enabling frameworks for getting it done. And anyone working on financing restoration? Giving out the big bucks or small? No? Okay, we hope to attract them later. Maybe we can steal them from another pavilion. And last but not least, who in this room here is under 30 years of age? So I have to sit down. Obviously, anyone under 30? Wow. Okay. That is great. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. So the reason why I'm asking also this question is that indeed youth is very important in restoration efforts. We always hear youth is the future for restoration, for nature, for climate, which is inspirational. But for myself, I sometimes also find that a little bit depressing because actually a lot of our restoration goals, as we are hearing here, are tied to the year 2030. Science tells us we need to take action by 2030 if we want to avoid catastrophic climate change or land degradation or nature loss. So the work is really starting now. This is why for the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, when we were trying to come up with a hashtag, it wasn't hashtag UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. It wasn't hashtag Decade on Restoration either, but our hashtag is Generation Restoration. Because the message for us is that everyone alive right now on this planet is part of the first generation to really feel the impacts of climate change and land degradation, nature loss, but is also perhaps part of the last generation to really seriously do something about it. So when we say generation restoration, it's not a youth initiative, it's actually the entire decade. Coming back to the Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, it was decided upon by the UN General Assembly, started in 2021, with a very big mandate. So the mandate for the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration is to restore all ecosystems, not only forests, not only land, but from the peaks of the mountains to the bottoms of the ocean, and to also reverse and halt the degradation of nature by 2030. So that's obviously a very big mandate. UNEP and FAO were tasked to co-lead on this decade on ecosystem restoration. But we realized quickly that this is a call too big for any one agency to answer, not even the UN. So this is why we structured the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration as a movement. We now bring together more than 280 partners. We have an action plan which lies out 12 challenges for restoration, including restoration in cities, the freshwater challenge, but also a climate challenge, an adaptation challenge, a challenge for indigenous people. And we ask our partners to step up and take part of this. We're reaching hundreds of millions of people. If you want to become part of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, it's open to you. There's a poster back there outlining how can civil society be part, how can finance be part, how can private sector be part of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. But really, we want everyone to be part of this movement. What we know about degradation, ecosystem restoration, and these are the facts that get repeated here over and over again as well, is that 1.5 billion hectares are in need of restoration right now. 40% of the global population, think about that, 40% of the global population is currently already suffering from land degradation because they don't have fertile soils, which means their food security is threatened, they don't have access to fresh water, and maybe within all this doom and gloom, part of the good news is that governments under the different Rio conventions have already promised to restore lands, oceans, freshwater ecosystems. Their promises cover 1 billion hectares. That's not quite the 1.5 that is degraded, but it is a start. It's an area larger than the size of China, so it is pretty big. The problem with that is, even today, even as the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, we still don't know completely where this restoration is happening, with which quality, which effects, and which benefits to local communities. That's why we as the UN Decade started a process of announcing the UN World Restoration Flagships, where we basically took this question and turned it around to countries. And we're asking countries, show us where you restore, show us where you're already restoring, where you're already making good on your promises, and to which effects. And we have selected 17 World Restoration Flagships so far. They're covering 200 million hectares, which is not quite the 1 billion hectare goal, but it's a step there, right, on the journey to 2030. And as we're talking about resilience and adaptation today, I just wanted to mention two of these flagships, which have a particular link to resilience and adaptation. I think we can learn from them. One of them is Regreening Africa, led by C4ICRAF, but across countries in Africa. So we know that 45% of Africa's land is degraded currently, and this flagship is working on restoring 5 million hectares of that. How are they doing it? And this is the interesting part. They're bringing together community, science, and policy. And in this, they have a very broad definition of knowledge. They're working with the latest of digital tools, AI-driven tools, but also traditional knowledge about agroforestry systems, about crop rotation, about which plants to plant. And one innovation they're working on right now is how you can use AI and image recognition to train the machine to take images from space, satellite data images, and assess the quality of the soil, which is really a game changer. That hasn't been there when we started the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So that's something I find personally really exciting, because we could measure forest cover with satellite data. We could not do that for soil. So that is a great advancement we're watching right now, and we're supporting this flagship in trialing this data collection in Africa. But they also work directly with communities on the ground on data collection. They have different systems for that. They have systems for including community knowledge. So that's very inspirational. The other flagship I wanted to quickly mention is the one focused on Mediterranean forests. And we also have one of our speakers from Lebanon running around here at COP. So what I actually didn't know was that the Mediterranean region is the world's second largest biodiversity hotspot. It is 16% of its forest species are at the risk of extinction. It's threatened by forest fires, but the Mediterranean flagship is now working on restoring 8 million hectares. And their secret is really bringing together restoration and prevention. So they are tackling forest fires, but they also regrowing the forests in a way that they're more resilient to fires. They had a lot of learnings in their journey. They started off replanting after there was a forest fire, but then they noticed if they plant the wrong species, or the species that used to grow there even, they're less adapted to climate change, because the climate has changed. The Mediterranean has changed. So now they're also working together with communities, giving them income opportunities through the restoration, involving them in monitoring, and really looking at growing resilient forest. If you're inspired by these initiatives, or want to learn more, or want to be part of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration itself, we're a very broad movement welcoming everyone. Go to decadeonrestoration.org. Again, there's also a poster back there with lots of QR codes and addresses and such, and we're really looking forward to growing our movement. And now I think I've talked for a long time, and I want to hear from our other speakers and their experiences on the ground. So thanks very much.
And Catherine, thank you. You could just put that back on the chair for the speakers. Thank you. Just very quickly, defining resilience. I just want to take a quick poll. What does resilience mean to you, madam? How would you say, if I say to you resilience, what's the one word that jumps out? Sorry.
Hello.
Reposez votre question.
C'est quoi la résilience? Ça va te dire quoi dans vos têtes? Quand je dis résilience, ça dit quoi?
La résilience, ce que je comprends, c'est en quelque sorte s'adapter. C'est l'adaptation au changement climatique.
Okay, so adaptation. Anybody else? What does resilience mean to you? I'm going to come to the gentleman at the back because they're having a little gossip. They're obviously not paying attention. Resilience.
Thank you for bringing our attention to this session. Resilience means extensive dedication.
I want resilience in common English. I don't want it in environmental speak. Okay? Resilience. If I say to you, my mother is resilient, what does that mean to you?
She can withstand adversity and thrive.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, good.
She bounces back.
There we go.
Strength.
Strength. Okay. So essentially, that is what we're talking about. Bouncing back. Strength. She continues. That's what we need to build in these systems. So with that in mind, we are going to get examples from 3 parts of the world, from Ghana, from Uganda, and also from Nigeria. So let us invite our first guest, please, to the stage. Now, this lady is the winner of the FAO Collaborative Partnership on Forests, the Wangari Maathai Forest Champions Award for 2015. If we could please have a round of applause for that. Thank you very much. She did extensive work to conserve biodiversity and forest ecosystems, combating desertification, climate change mitigation, and because she wasn't busy enough, she also thought she'd take on adaptation for community resilience. Gertrude Kabusimbi Kenyange is the Executive Director for the group known as Support for Women in Agriculture and Environment. And she's based in Uganda with 20 years of experience behind her. And her speciality particularly is engagement with the local community, indigenous communities, indigenous species. So when we're finished here, that's one lady you need to grab to have a discussion with. So Gertrude, I wonder if you could please begin your presentation and explain just some of your work that you've taken on. Thank you very much.
Charlie, thank you for having me. I'm grateful that you have all turned up to hear what I have to say. Yeah. So my presentation today is entitled Indigenous and Local Community Women Lead Forest Ecosystem Restoration. So just to give it a little bit of context, the highest annual deforestation and forest degradation rate worldwide in recent years has been found in Africa. And what results have it caused? It has caused rapid desertification. It has caused loss and damage as indigenous species. Both flora and fauna have been lost forever. That's what we mean when we say loss and damage. And then it's had very adverse impacts on local communities. There's widespread food insecurity. There's outright famine in some areas. There's malnutrition. There's disease resulting from malnutrition. And there's poverty. And there are lots of other issues. But also it has gender-specific impacts. There's increased care workload for women. They have to take care of the sick. They have to invest more energy and more time in producing food. And there's a lot of child marriages. Children are given away, especially in pastoralist communities, to get married so that their families can get money, can get how to get by. There's transactional sex that results in high levels of STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. There are lots of teenage pregnancies, which are very dangerous because when someone is not old enough and they have a baby, they get into situations they cannot reverse. There's increased gender-based violence, with men unable to provide for their families. Their masculinity is under question. So what do? An angry man makes it out on his children and his wife. So it's becoming increasingly difficult. So women have risen up to this challenge. As you can see from the photos that I've attached, women are uniquely positioned to address the urgent environment, climatic, and desertification challenge because they are keepers of traditional knowledge about seed collection, seed preservation, seed propagation, and they are also stewards of the earth and its resources because they establish and maintain tree nurseries. They plant trees. They do transfer planting. They maintain. All right, done with my mic. Also, sorry, I'm an indigenous and grassroots woman. What I'm used to doing is shouting, not talking on microphones. So that's what we've been doing. And the photos give the photos there attached. You can see the women are collecting seeds. They are preparing the ground for the seed planting, the mulching, the nursery gardens. Okay, so and the process of restoration continues. Tree nursery establishment, soil preparation and potting, tree nursery maintenance. There's a lot of work in tree nursery maintenance. I've just mentioned watering, weeding, and pest control. There's transfer of tree seedlings to restoration sites. That one you can see for yourself. There's excavation, planting, spot weeding. You can see the women are the ones that are packaging. And the man with a big tummy is standing over them, looking like a boss giving orders. Okay. So, swimming against the tide, what challenges do women face? Or don't they face any challenges? Women have limited access to, control of, and decision making regarding productive resources. Only 7% women have titles to the land they are working on. That means they've got to get permission from their male relative, husband, brother, father, to be able to use the land. So it's difficult for them to make permanent or profitable investment like tree planting. And then restoration activities compete for resources with other vital activities like food cultivation. That I don't have to elaborate. If I have one hole and I need to use it for food cultivation and then for restoration activities, it becomes a challenge. Then there is increased unpaid, productive, reproductive, and community care workload. If you have to do everything in the home, take care of the elderly, the children, the family, and then restore, so it becomes difficult. The photos tell it all. You can see the women involved in the planting and spot weeding, and one of those women is me. I don't know whether you can identify me. I'm one of them. Okay. Continuing with the challenges, well, we are asking, now this is what we are demanding as women. We are demanding that you increase funding to restoration activities. To enable us, funding is an enabler. We'll be able to make decisions we'll be able to activate our agency if we have finances. We ask you to stand with women as we demand our rights, especially the right to land, right to participate in governance of natural resources. It's very sad if I'm going to preserve the forest and I cannot participate in the decision making regarding the forest. And then we ask that you recognize, reduce, and reduce. Actually, here I ask for investment, that you invest in reduction and redistribution of unpaid care work. Yeah, thank you for listening.
Gertrude, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. You take on an incredible amount of work. Just before we hear from our next speaker, have you ever wanted to give up?
Never. I've never wanted to give up. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. You take on a lot of issues there, a lot. Okay, our next speaker hails from Ghana. He is Dr. James Abonsa, who is a research fellow at Earth Care Ghana. He has vast experience in implementing landscape restoration projects, helping local communities, and his specialities within the northern savanna drylands of Ghana. He's building resilience, so this is going to be interesting. And he has a couple of examples. We're running out of time, but a few examples that he will thankfully share with us. Doctor, welcome to the stage. Do you have the clicker?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here to share with you some of the experiences and the knowledge gained as part of our work in engaging communities to build resilience through civil pastoral systems, especially in northern Ghana. So in context, I will be discussing some of the climate change impacts in northern Ghana, the species diversity and livelihood survey that was carried out as a baseline study before our intervention, and then a process of co-designing with local people a special agroforestry system known as the civil pastoral system, and then how were the knowledge and experience gained shared with other stakeholders. So the northern part of Ghana, of course, is semi-arid. It's highly vulnerable to climate change impact. There are issues with high temperatures, erratic rainfall, perennial wildfires, water scarcity, high level of poverty. And this is actually impacting livelihoods. I've even noticed some areas where they do perennial burning, annual burning, and they even do it on 2 occasions. So they have the first burning and the second burning. This is actually impacting land, it's impacting agriculture and affecting livelihoods seriously. And so we need to act to ensure that, yes, lands are saved and livelihoods are also protected. The government and other developing partners are prioritizing tree planting and agroforestry systems as a means for land restoration, which has proven to be very effective. But our intervention, what was the approach? First of all, we set out to carry a large-scale survey in order to understand existing tree diversity in the landscape. And this was to help us select species or tree species that would be well suited for the environment. And beyond that, would also serve the needs and aspirations of local communities. And then there was a co-designing process. And afterwards, the knowledge was shared. So briefly, let me take you through this. There was a survey both on farm for tree species. The survey covered livelihood, gender roles, and even existing tree species on their farms. Species that were there and species that existed in the past that they can no longer see. We had to take our time to document all this to clearly understand how to propose tree species that are well suited for the environment. The results were amazing. It was very extensive. We covered about 376 communities in 5 regions in northern Ghana. And we're able to come out with species preference of farmers. Some of them were of cultural importance to farmers. We also realized that when it comes to percentages, we realized that some of the species had several uses, as well as some functional, ecological, and functional traits that made them more useful to farmers. One thing we realized was that we had to assess constraints to land restoration by local people. We went in thinking that definitely it's going to be financing, but we realized that it wasn't financing. In fact, lack of planting materials, access to high quality planting materials was a challenge faced by most farmers to engage in restoration. So, what actually did we do? We went further to co design civil pastoral systems, an agroforestry system that integrates livestock, trees, together with forages of the farmers. And then we had to meet with the farmers through rural workshops to understand their needs. We also introduced the system. We also worked closely with them. So here in this picture, you can see a group of farmers carefully examining a tree species we want to introduce. They are discussing, they want to know how useful it's going to be, how it's going to help them with their farming activities. And together, we set up demonstration plots close to the communities to help them understand that civil pastoral systems can be very useful in restoring degraded lands. Of course, gender roles were also considered. So in most of our meetings or workshops, we also engaged a lot of women, making sure that their views are also heard. Now, two silver pastoral systems were established. These were demonstration plots where farmers could actually see the benefits of all the components. In fact, they had been part of the co-designing process, so they had a decision in terms of the spatial and the temporal arrangement of all the components. So there were 3 species that were planted. Of course, some are still at the seedling stage. There were crops that were also integrated, forages, and the raising of animals. And farmers could actually see the benefits of this system in helping them to restore lands. How did we share the experience and knowledge? Of course, through several technical documents and technical reports. But one of them I would want to highlight is the Diversity for Restoration tool. It is actually a tool managed by the Alliance for Biodiversity, which is part of the CGR system. What happens is that using this tool, restoration practitioners could go online, actually select a site in northern Ghana and other parts of the sub-Saharan region. And once the site is selected, to take you through some questions, and when you provide answers, the tool will actually recommend species, 3 species that are well adapted to the environment and more useful to communities. And when you use this in your restoration project, definitely you are going to get better results. Farmers will be more likely to accept and adopt the approach. This is a very useful tool for most restoration practitioners in Ghana and other parts of the world. And we have contributed data to Diversity for Restoration. The key lessons is that yes, strong community and stakeholder engagement are vital for any successful restoration. Of course, local knowledge, local traditional knowledge. Initially, we went in with a system to protect planted seedlings, but the community had developed the picture you see up there. This was a unique way of protecting seedlings, especially in the dry season. It is covered with this mud and a particular plant that prevents browsing from animals and can also maintain a cool environment for the seedling. And when the rain sets in, it is broken and the seedlings will survive. This was an incredible local knowledge we had to adopt, and it really helped us to be very successful. The lesson is that local knowledge and experience are vital to help restore landscapes and build resilience. We also need to understand cultural and livelihood context of the communities we intend to work with. When we do that, it is to help us to understand gender roles and how to engage them for better outputs. And then select species that are locally adapted and can meet the needs and aspirations of the local people we work with. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dr. Aponsa, thank you very much. If you could just take a seat, because we're going to come to our discussion in a moment. Just very quickly, before we hear from Mikhail, you said, and we also engage women because their views were also included. I was listening to that and I thought, that just sounds like a throwaway. Why did you engage women?
We we noticed that they play a key role in terms of restoration. They are engaged in the day-to-day management of the household, of course, with the support of their husbands. But women are mostly affected by climate change impact because they need to feel the effects of climate change. And so engaging them, listening to them, sorting for their views was really helpful to help us get a successful project.
Okay, thank you very much for that qualification. And that was Dr. Amponsa. Right, our next guest is, he hails from Nigeria, and he is the founder of the organization known as the Drylands Initiative for Ecosystem Restoration and Capacity Building. There we go. And he operates mainly in Nigeria's arid regions, pioneering, and I'm really keen to hear this, pioneering agroforestry techniques are just some of his tools in trying to combat climate change and also implement restoration. He has locally led adaptation strategies, and also building partnerships is key. We're hearing about stakeholders, we're hearing about forming lasting partnerships. So please welcome to the stage Mikael Haruna Daya. Thank you very much indeed.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Yeah. Once again, I am Mikael Haruna Daya, and I'm the founder of Drylands Initiative for Ecosystem Restoration and Capacity Building. So we are a non-profit. Our work is mostly in the northern part of Nigeria. We fall within the Great Green Wall Corridor. Nigeria has 5 ecological zones, and then the drylands and the such is the semi-arid ecosystems is where our work is mostly focused on. And our core pillars actually encompass community empowerment through restoration. If you are in the drylands, your major focus should be restoration. And we also try as much as we could, because it's an arid region, to see how we can utilize the use of water. The little water that we have, how do we utilize it in our restoration efforts? And then we do build capacity and capacity building and knowledge transfer. How do we do this? You will hear in the next slide. So our initiative actually is restoration techniques which encompass tree planting, rainwater harvesting, and agroforestry. How we come about this particular initiative on restoration techniques is through participatory land use planning. We go through the communities, about 300 communities along the Sahelian belt of northern Nigeria. We meet with the communities, and if we go to a community, we don't only interact with just the community that we go to. We invite the surrounding communities. We sit down with everybody, and not only the farmers, but all land users. We sit down with the pastoralists. We sit down with also other people, fishermen and others. And then we come up with what we call the community action plan. How do we come up with this? We start with a problem identification. But then during the problem identification, we noticed that the problem that came on first might not really the most severe in the community. So how do we then gauge that? We do a problem ranking. For instance, they may mention soil infertility as the first problem, but then after the pairwise ranking, gully erosion might feature in as the first problem and the most severe in the community. So in order of severity, we develop a community action plan. The community action plan will then tell us what that community really wants. And tree planting, rainwater harvesting, and agroforestry are part of the solutions that featured prominently in the community action plans. We believe agroforestry, tree planting, and rainwater harvesting will help us in reviving soil infertility, will help in gully erosion, will help in reforestation, and so many others. And then that was why we then tried to train the communities and hold them to restore their own communities. And the livelihood opportunities. The livelihood opportunities is more or less for us as a monitoring and evaluation tool. We understood that we can train the communities, we can teach them how to restore their land, we can teach them all that we could teach. But then after leaving, northern Nigeria is too big and we cannot be everywhere at the same time. So how do we know? How do we then monitor and evaluate the progress over time? We link them to a business model that if they are planting gum arabic, we see how they can be gaining something from that gum arabic. And from that, we'll then know that this initiative is actually growing. If in August, they reported that, okay, we were able to sell so amount and we were able to get this revenue from it. And the next year, August, we can have an increase in revenue, then perhaps we can now comfortably say that this restoration effort is ongoing and it's a success. Then community empowerment through training and mobilization of local councils. So this is more or less like SDG Goal 17. It's trying to see how we can bring together all the initiatives under one umbrella. So, so far the impact we have made is we have restored 500 hectares of degraded land. In our efforts, we realized that if we go to the communities we encourage them to stop felling of trees, the question they ask us is, how do you want us to cook food? So if you come to a community and you tell a person who used fuel wood to cook his food to stop felling wood, you're telling him not to eat food. So what we did was to see how we can then devise a means that will answer to the local circumstances. What we did was to see how we can establish community woodlots. From those community woodlots, the farmers will be able to get the woods that will fuel, they can use as fuel wood. Another thing is establishing community nurseries. We establish community nurseries, and during the participatory land use planning, communities always volunteer to plant, nurture, and maintain tree plantations. Most often than not, the village head will give you a land to establish the community nursery and even the woodlot. We've also tried to do community engagement. During our community engagement, which we go to household, we don't really deal with the household, but in the community, we have farmers. In a community of maybe 500 farmers, and when you train these farmers, we do what we call neighbor to neighbor, or rather sensitization. So when you get a farmer in a cluster of about 300 hectares of land, this farmer will then train the other farmer, and then another farmer will train the other farmer, and then with that you achieve the desired result. And so far we're happy with the result we are getting from most of the communities across the Sahelian belt. And then the establishment of community nurseries. This picture is from a community in Yobe State, where the village head himself actually established a community nursery and named it after his daughter. All right, then our future goal. We hope to upscale. That is normal. And this is what we have been doing. We want to upscale our restoration efforts in that we want to see how the communities we train will be able to also train the neighboring communities, and then we can have a belt of just like the Great Green Wall corridor. We are working very closely with the Great Green Wall Agency to see that that community is helping the next community, and the next community will also help in training the next community. And then we hope to strengthen partnerships for financing and technical support, and then expanding our rainwater harvesting systems. I have spoken very little about the rainwater harvesting. The rainwater harvesting in most of northern Nigeria, we have open pits, which were usually as a result of mining for construction. So we are actually converting these open pits to become rainwater harvesting ponds, which can be used mostly during dry spells. This year in Nigeria, in August, in the northern Nigeria, we have a dry spell of about 25 days. So when you have that, you can then utilize the rainwater harvesting ponds for actually watering your plantations. Thank you very much.
Mikhail, thank you very much indeed. And before we I just want to put one question to you. In terms of scaling up, do you know where to go for that? What organizations to speak? You spoke about the Great Green Wall, but do you know where to get those tools to scale up next?
We're talking with everybody.
Okay.
Yes, we're
Okay.
talking with everybody, and the most important people to talk to is the communities.
Okay.
And we're talking with them.
Okay, that's great, because
Thank you.
that is often the challenge. How do you go about it? And funding, of course, is so important. So you heard some of the success stories, some of the challenges, and some of the tools as well. Could I just check that everybody has a microphone? Gertrude, do you have your microphone? Oh, wonderful. Okay. My first question to you, I don't know if Anne-Catherine will join us. Yes? Wonderful. My first question to our three action guests is the current system of restoration, based on your experience, the research, the guidance, say from the UN or from environmental organizations, is it fit for purpose for your particular case studies? Gertrude, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Maybe before, when I was making my presentation, I should also have said I'm a member of the advisory board of the Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. Yes. Yeah, the current system of restoration is fit for purpose. In my opinion, it's fit for purpose, but we have to make sure that the rights holders are given due recognition in the restoration process. It's the process that may not be fit for purpose, but the generation of data, that strategies and everything would be fit for purpose if every person was given, if the rights holders were given recognition as the primary people in the restoration process.
Okay, so it's the stages in the process of restoration.
Yes.
Yeah. The doctor, your thoughts?
I strongly believe that these tools and resources by environmental organizations are great. They are based on years of research and trials. And of course, they are very useful for restoration. But we also need to go further and align them with the needs and aspirations of communities. For instance, some of these tools or guidelines could recommend a particular species for restoration. But the question is, do the communities really need it? Do they find it to be of a cultural importance?
Do you have an example of that?
Yes.
Please tell us.
So that is it. So we had gone through the tools and the literature to understand that a particular species was good for restoration in the northern region. But when we went down to the grassroots to recommend the species for plantation, in fact, there were a lot of gender issues. For instance, we learned strangely that they said women should not be planting that tree because it's definitely not going to grow well if a woman plants it. So these are fundamental cultural issues that we need to understand before we begin to recommend the results of these tools. So I think that they need to be more aligned with communities' needs, aspirations, and even their cultural and environmental characteristics.
Thank you, Mikhail.
Thank you. So I think I will answer this with an example. We went to a community in northern Nigeria. So when we went to the community for a need assessment, we saw women going to a stream very far, like 2 kilometers away from the community. We just assume that that is the problem of the community. It's water. We went to the village head and we asked him, where does he want us to locate the borehole? And then he told us, he showed us the place, and we even went further to say that we want it at the center of the town. After 3 months, we did a very fantastic borehole, including a water purification plant. We went, we left, and then after 3 months, we came back. We saw the same woman going 2 kilometers to that stream, fishing the water. It was amazing. And we went to the village head and we asked him, why are they not using the borehole? He said, they said they are not going to use it. So we then sent for them and we asked, what is really the problem? They said, when you came, you discussed with the men. So the men should be using your borehole. So, and then we then discussed further.
I like that.
Yes. And they told us that actually they go to the stream and they discuss their problems with their fellows. So they like it that way. So you see, this is where fit for purpose came in. If we had engaged with them, they would have given us a better location. They would have accepted our intervention. They will have this community ownership, and we would have a win-win. We're solving their problems. We're happy. They're happy. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those examples. Those are the untold stories, the nuances when it comes to land restoration and engagement that a lot of us are unaware of. Catherine, just listening to that, were you aware of some of those issues? And what are your thoughts briefly on that?
Wow. Is this on? Yes, okay. Well, first of all, also thanks to the G20 Land Initiative to inviting me to this occasion, not for myself to speak, but really to listen to these experiences on the ground. As I mentioned, we have a lot of organizations being part of the UN Decade. We have the advisory board with experts such as Gertrude joining us and advising us on gender issues, on linking better to communities, but it's always so invaluable to hear how directly the projects unfold on the ground. And from the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, we are aware of these anecdotal evidences, and of course we also have the bigger picture, like Gertrude mentioned, women's land rights, a big topic here. Also at the UNCCD COP, there's a draft decision on gender, draft decision 6, and women's land rights feature in that, and we want to see, okay, what can actually be decided here that makes a difference for women on the ground, because often it's also inheritance laws, it's a lot of issues coming into play. We from the UN Decade are here to listen. We also have our own tools. We have standards of practice for restoration that helps restoration implementers report on restoration, that helps governments make the restoration efforts part of the international commitments. We work a lot with communication, but all the communication is really to elevate the work that is being done on the ground and to get more support for the work on the ground. We have a business enhancement working group that works with restoration implementers to develop business plans. So there's a lot, but we're also open to feedback. So tomorrow we have a session at 4:30 at the UNEP Pavilion, and I invite everyone to also come. It's going to be an interactive session about the next 5 years in the decade.
And Catherine? Beautifully handled. You were not expecting that question. Thank you very much. Okay, one of the big issues at COP, and all of you have said you've brought this particular issue up, and it is one of the barriers, okay, to upscaling land restoration and making it resilient is money. Money. What are your thoughts on the green financing, money? Do people like yourselves, organizations like yourselves at the ground level, how easy is it to access green financing? Is that process working, that mechanism? Who wants to go first? You want to access the money, where do you go for it?
The process is actually not easy. Most of the criterias are not met by the smallholder farmers. For me, I work directly with the communities and then smallholder farmers. So we realized this problem, I think, 2 years ago, and what we are doing is to see how we can build the capacity of these communities. First and foremost, we have made sure that they are registered. And then to fulfill the fiduciary assessment, we have now embedded ESG into their systems. We are trying to see that they have all the necessary requirements to meet to meet the requirements of the funders. This has been very difficult because, like I said, we realized this 2 years, and then if you are applying, you need 2 years audited financial statement. It's very difficult. And it's another big barrier when applying is when you hear funders asking you if they have a fund of about maybe $20,000, they would say that, okay, you need to have like 10% turnover. These communities don't have that. It's very difficult. The requirements are stringent that it's almost impossible for these communities to access. And but we are looking at, because this is something that we need for us to upscale. So we are looking at how how we will be able to achieve this.
So if you don't have access to that financing, what does that mean for resilience? I mean, this is what it's all about. What are the implications going to be?
So, of course, green financing is great, and we've all been encouraged to find ways of ensuring that we get support. But as you mentioned, access has been a challenge. Sometimes you have to go through very complex application processes. Sometimes it will require huge amount of co-funding, and this is actually a challenge. At times you have to do it through sub-granting from a bigger organization, which is a way of us getting some of these things done, because you need to go through a bigger government agency where you are sub-granted an amount so you can work directly with the community. So of course, if these processes are designed to favor grassroots community organizations, I think that can really help us to achieve our restoration goals.
Gertrude, you said you're not used to talking into a microphone. You're a business lady. You're used to shouting and people hearing you. So what would you shout about if you want us to make sure that land restoration is resilient? What would be your war cry?
I'd say that you get, we are talking about green financing.
Yes.
Would like the terms to be defined clearly. There's green financing. We hear a lot of terms. You know, green financing, climate finance, and this sort of thing. So for us as grassroots people, as indigenous people, we don't know what you mean by green. Yes, because we live green. So we don't know what you are talking about when you say green financing. But then we also, like the previous speakers have pointed out, the application process is very complex. The demand that we have, we put up co-financing is also very difficult. We have no co-financing to put up, but we can contribute in kind. Sometimes in kind is not accepted. So it becomes very complicated. We are saying simplify access to the green financing. And how do you simplify it? Come down to the frontline communities and discuss with them. Don't you approach the grassroots communities as if they know nothing. They've held this thing together like forever. If they weren't there restoring, maybe it would have accelerated out of our hands already. So you approach with respect, you know, and find their opinions, find what they can give advice on, and how you can finance them, and what they have to contribute.
So Gertrude, you've been doing this for 20 years,
Yes.
more than 20 years.
Yes.
You have seen quite a journey.
Yes.
Messaging has changed, priorities have changed at local level and at governmental and national level.
Yes.
Have you been able to adapt quick enough, number one, to the impacts of climate change, because they are speeding up? And in order to be resilient, you need to adapt quickly. What do you think is going to be the next thing on your priority list of things to do? I need to be doing that in order to make sure all these people survive. Just very quickly, 20 years experience.
Yes.
You've seen a lot. What's next?
Yeah, we haven't been able to adapt quickly because climate change is a moving baseline. It's changing faster than we can adapt. So we haven't been able to adapt quickly. Yeah, so there's nothing really that we can. Right now, we are demanding that it is a concerted effort, that the polluters scale down on their pollution, they gravitate towards alternative renewable energies from use of fossil fuels, that there's seriousness in the process of just transition, you know, so that the transition is serious and people are quick to do it. Yeah, because there's no way that we can adapt as quickly as the climate is changing.
Dr. Mambo, so you've got the data. I mean, you showed us some of that data. What is it telling you?
Of course, I agree with the previous speakers. Climate change is happening so fast and we are able to adapt. But to really help communities to build resilience, most of our research findings should get to them. The benefit, they should see the benefits of our research findings. So we bridge the gap between these complex research papers and then the communities. Once they get to understand the benefits of our research, they are more likely to adopt. But I also have the issue of upscaling, access to finance to upscale. We may have very important or very innovative ideas to help in land restoration. We may have a small demonstration plot, but the point is, how do we get access to funding to upscale so that we can ensure that the communities will adapt and adopt these strategies for better land restoration?
Okay, before I just ask the audience if they have any questions or reflections, Mika, would you like to add to that at all? Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to say on this point? Okay, any questions from the floor in terms of experience, advice? Anybody have any comments? Yes, the lady here. I'll give you my microphone. Just bear with me. Oh, there's one behind you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Beatrice Ogolla from Kenya. I'm impressed with the presentations. My lady here talks about the fact that polluters should scale down on pollution. But the question is, collectively, how does that come about? How do we ensure that comes about? Is it just telling them to scale down, or is there some effort that should be made down, either by government, by sectors, different sectors, to ensure that the polluters scale down? Are we just saying that by telling them they would scale down? What are some of the incentives that we can put in place? What are some of the efforts that different sectors can put in place to ensure that that happens?
Are you speaking from experience? What have you seen that needs to be done? Or you thought, it would help if this happens? Are you talking from experience?
I'm seeing she's just getting back to me.
Okay, Gertrude.
Thank you very much, Senator. Yeah, we cannot tell them to scale down. These are people who are working in the private sector. They've got to get it, They've got to, when the President Obama was making his campaign, he said they know, but they don't get it, you see. So they've got to get it. They've got to know that climate change is happening, and it's not only against me or against you, but also against them. So they've got to make a decision, a conscious decision, to invest into alternative renewable energies. Invest in alternative renewable energies. Each person has got to take a decision and have a commitment to do it.
Excuse me, I heard Gertrude refer to you as senator.
Yes.
I take it you're at government level in Kenya?
Yeah, at legislation level.
Okay, could we just have your name, please?
I said I'm Senator Beatrice Ogolla from the Kenya.
Okay.
And I could go on to say, give the experience we've had in Kenya, that we put into legislation and policy the fact that we should ban plastic use. And I think that has worked in Kenya, because all of a sudden we do not see plastics that were polluting our water bodies and increasing on pollution. So one of the things we can do is work on legislation, relevant legislation. Two, we could also give incentives that could help us to ensure that we are reducing pollution.
Senator, thank you very much. Any more questions before we close? Okay, I want to say a huge thank you to my panel today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your experiences. And as I said, if you'd like to speak to them, please do grab our guests today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Don't go away, because we're going to get a family photo very quickly.